So here's how it's going to flow. So I'll introduce the debaters in a second. Then there's going to be a poll in the audience. Please answer. We want to benchmark where people stand on this position statement. Then each debater will have 10, 15 minutes. At 15 minutes, we will stop them abruptly so they don't go beyond time. And then it will be a bit of a small break with another poll to go where things are heading. So you'll have a second poll then, and then the debaters will have 5 minutes rebuttals each, and then we will have, again, time for Q&A, and then at the end will be a final vote, and someone will be declared the winner. So let's start with the introduction, and then we'll call them to the podium. But first, let's do the voting. So let's, the position statement says AI-integrated remote models of care will improve care outcomes, cancer care outcomes. Do you agree or disagree? How many people is there in the audience here?
I voted for you. I voted for you.
Thank you. It will make your closing remarks easier. Okay, people, come on. There's 35. There should be another like 30 people voting. Give it or take. So that will stay there, but there's like 90% people agreeing that it's gonna. Lesley, did you actually broaden like the healthcare engineer people here, or? So okay, Dr. Lesley Moody joined Varian and Siemens in 2023. So she's an ex-UHN employee, as was said before. She left us. Huh? That's her version. As a solution director in Canada for a multidisciplinary oncology program. Before, she was the clinical director at PM, and she was leading also at CCO, patient-centered care program, where she led a whole portfolio about value-based healthcare and patient-reported outcomes. She has a PhD from UFT, specializing in health services and cancer research, and an MBA, and trained originally as a biochemist in McMaster University. Extremely smart, energetic, and fun to work with. So we miss her, but we're happy to have you here on the debate. Dr. Michael Crump joined the Department of Medicine in 1992. He's been on staff in Princess Margaret since 1998. So if you weren't born by that time, don't feel bad. He's been director of because I wasn't born then. Because he's been a fellowship program director, a clinical director of the autologous blood and bone marrow transplant, and site lead of the lymphoma group. And in addition, he's had membership of various groups and the development of new drugs committees at the CCTG, the Canadian Cancer Trial Groups, and has been co-chair of the CCTG Hematology Committee and the chair of the Lymphoma Working Group. He has research interest in clinical and translational research lymphoma, improving salvage therapy prior to stem cell transplant, and has been PI and co-PI of numerous clinical trials with over 200 peer-reviewed papers and a number of book chapters. I've seen him in the clinic. He has treated friends of mine, and he's a superb clinician and nice guy to be around, and extremely shrewd sitting at the REB. So it's always been fun to learn from both his knowledge and his sense of humor. So this should be fun. As I said, should be bleedy also. And with that, we'll leave to Lesley to start the first argument for the motion, which 88% of the people approve. So in terms statistically, regression to the mean should favor you. So the chances of winning are pretty high. So
well, thank you. So the reason I have an old school notebook up here is that we didn't actually share what our arguments were going to be, so we'll have to come up with it while you're voting the next time, so that should be interesting. So my name is Lesley Moody. As you heard, I was not fired, but I did write those nice comments about myself so that Ale had something nice to say about me. But thank you very much for the invitation. It is like coming home. I obviously have many admirers here with 86% agree, so I didn't have to bring any health and ears with me. I work in the cancer division in Siemens Healthineers. It's called Varian. You might know them if you work in the radiation department. We're global leader in radiation oncology, but many people don't know that we actually do quite a bit of work across the entire cancer continuum. I think I'm going to offer a little bit of a different perspective today for the affirmative side of the statement that you have above. So bear with me here. Am I going? Okay. If there are some courageous people to yell out, what is the link between our supercomputer in Edison, New Jersey at Princeton? It's called Sherlock. We didn't want to be Watson like IBM, so we had a little play on characters there. What is the link between Sherlock and the Eagles Stadium? Fans in the Eagles Stadium. See?
Power consumption.
That's a good one. I didn't think of that. Nope. Anyone else courageous to guess something? Yeah, it's what's in common with the fans, though. The fans and our supercomputer. Noise, interesting. Nope, not. No. Energy? No. You guys are all clinicians. Something more basic. Way too philosophical. But we are getting to the afternoon of Friday, so we could debate that over a couple cocktails, I'm sure. No, way more simplistic. So 500,000, or 500 million billion. Any more guesses of what that would be? I'll put us out of our misery. That's a half an exaflop. Oh, the joke is that they hired me at a tech company, and I literally know nothing other than how to restart my computer. So half an exaflop is how many operations per second our Sherlock computer computes. And that equals roughly the number of cells in all of the fans in an American football stadium, if you can imagine. So just think about that. That's in operations per second that we are able to compute in our Sherlock computer. And why I'm orienting you to this is because I didn't know what AI was before this talk, so I had to orient myself to the conversation. I thought maybe some others might like it as well in terms of where we're going in terms of the processing power. Because today you heard a lot about apps and virtual care and how they're disintegrated with our system, how we create these things from a research perspective, and they're very difficult to spread and scale. But I think AI is here to offer you a solution for how to integrate that, learn from the system, and then actually leapfrog. Stop creating another app that collects symptoms with radial buttons and leapfrog into the future. So at this point, we have, as I mentioned, we have about an exaflop of, and this is a log scale, by the way, when you have centralized computing power. At the point of care, that's still a dampened growth, because as you can imagine, there's not a lot of people that can have the power, the energy, the temperature control, the et cetera, to run a supercomputer out of the hospital. But we're at the point where this is doubling every 9 years, and we're on the track to actually enable zettaflops and move the point of care computing power up to where we are with centralized computing power. We're still at a point where we're not truly at quantum computing, where you can get to things like superposition, but we're not far off. This world is moving at a pace faster than we can think. So you heard about apps today that were created in 2014, 15, 16. We are 10 years later from that. What we know today with supercomputing will already be obsolete. So think about where you came on that log scale for the last 10 years and think about where we're going to be going in the next 10 years. So I'd like to offer you some different thoughts around what models of remote care could be enabled with artificial intelligence. And I won't get into any of the rebuttal arguments because I don't want to steal any of Dr. Crump's thunder. This is probably what you think about when you think of artificial intelligence, or where most of our understanding is today. Using it to do repeatable tasks, and a lot of our examples are in radiology because that's where many things occurred. So if you have 500 million, whatever that is, medical images, it would take, if you only spent 10 seconds per image on that, it would take 150 years to look at each of those images. And think about what we can do to improve accuracy, more robust, more scalable, more accelerated training with the amount of information that is coming into our systems and these supercomputers. And this is just one use case that I feel like we can all understand because we've heard about AI in medical imaging for quite some time now. It's probably the most advanced area that we're in. But what I would offer you is two different thoughts and thought processes for models of care in the AI space. One at the system level and one at the direct patient level, so that we may bridge this plethora of apps that have been developed, the biometrics that we're trying to solve, the wearables that we still haven't cracked, the change management challenges that we have at every single knock on the door when we try to implement something new. So think about an operational twin that you could create for your department or for the whole hospital. Think about the supercomputing power that we have, all the data elements that are coming into our system, and think about if we train that from an exascale simulation perspective. An exascale is still not quantum computing, but it still offers very complex simulation modeling to help us predict the needs that we have in the community or in our community ecosystem that we're talking about. We can do this today. We've tested it, we've tried it. We're not at a point where we've commercialized it. We work with partners to be able to do that. But think about this, if you could actually consume all of the information across your entire hospital department, whatever you want to replicate as a twin, and run real-time simulation and games within that to actually start to get to a more predictive model. Where we're going, though, is scaling this operational twin to an entire health system or community. So breaking down those barriers with the complexity that we have so that we can actually test before we spend tons of money deploying very expensive prototypes. We love our prototypes, we love our models, we love our pilots, but we could actually do that on a faster, more rapid scale in these simulation models. And this is not a concept. We're starting to test this with partners and scaling it as our computational power increases. So think about capacity management. Think about all that you heard today, your virtual care, understanding the symptoms that patients are having in their home, understanding and predicting what the next step will be for that patient cohort, but you're able to test that model on an actual health system twin in real time. I know it seems a little bit far-fetched and it's a little Star Trek-y, but we're actually getting there. In our Princeton Artificial Intelligence office, we actually do this on regular computers. Anything that we build on regular web-based systems so that we can make sure that that's translatable in the future to actual health systems and make it attainable. So think about that from a staffing perspective, a capacity, a investment in new operational models, and apply this from a remote patient model of care perspective. So this is from a system level, but then we have a whole host of work that we are doing from an integrated perspective with the data that we have coming in today. So right now, we're at a very shallow level of artificial intelligence. We're at imaging, we're at natural language processing, large language models, and even those, you probably all have ChatGPT on your phone. Think about where that was 1 year ago. People hadn't even heard that term before. And now you can, say, I'm going to Hawaii for a week, build me a 5-day itinerary. I like to hike, I like to go to breweries, and I like to relax. And it will spit that out in a nanosecond for you. People are using that on a regular basis just in their smartphone, but that's still what we would call very shallow AI. So what we're getting to is figuring out, layering on an ability to actually access all of that clinical information from a patient, layer in that artificial intelligence, move us to a state of much more deep AI so that we can get to a point where this is usable information. But we can't do that if there aren't the innovators, there aren't the researchers that are doing those pieces of work so that we can knit this story together. Am I saying that you should always build before you buy? No, absolutely not. I work in industry now. I will never say that. But what you can do is think about what our keynote speaker stated was, how do you come up with the solution to problems you're seeing every day and partner in the system to be able to accelerate that with people who do have the computing power and people who do have the linkage to all of the data. The local level, this is actually our head of the Princeton office, and that is his actual heart beating, that is his actual brain MRI, and those are his lab values coming into the system. So we talked about it from a system level perspective, but let's take it down to an actual patient level perspective. So we're building out digital twin models from an accessible healthcare perspective, even based on basic lab work that occurs anywhere in the world, a standard panel like CBC. Now, obviously, more advanced access to imaging and things like that is not necessarily from an equitable perspective. But think about having in the palm of your hand a digital twin of yourself. So when you get, and we're testing this as well right now, when you get an image, you go in and you have it, say in cancer care, and you have a new CT scan that you're looking for progression of disease, contouring the tumor, doing a comparison to your last scan, using an LLM to actually spit out a grade 3-4 reading level version of that report, coloring in the tumor for you, coloring in any structures, linking you to your patient care, and telling you exactly where to click to be able to schedule your virtual care call to actually meet with a provider to have that one-on-one interaction to get the information that you need. So think about the possibilities from an AI perspective of putting a digital twin layer over top of your actual health system. Maybe it's only at department or hospital level, but then also giving yourself that digital twin in the palm of your hands that's a compendium of all of your health information moving forward. Whether you filled that out on a research app or you filled that out via something more industry focused like an Epic MyChart, for example, it won't matter. We are getting to a place where that won't matter. So my argument to you for the affirmative is we don't know at all what we don't know today for where healthcare is going to be in 10 years. And we need to break out of this current model of thinking where we need to think about leapfrogging from radio button apps to actually helping design models of care with clinicians who know patients, they know clinical care, and they know the problems that patients are facing, but doing that from a data-informed perspective so that we actually can build out these very sophisticated models and put them in the hands of administrators and clinicians at that point of care. So I urge you to choose the affirmative when we get to the rebuttal from Dr. Crump. Thank you.
Okay, having another version of yourself in the palm of your hand, it's like, that's very perturbing. I barely can deal with one version of myself. Okay, so Dr. Trump, he goes for his arguments. 15 minutes, I'll be.
So thank you for hanging around on Friday afternoon and listening to a simple clinician talk about a topic that he really actually knows nothing about. So I think, so I took it literally. Does AI integrated remote models of care, are they going to improve outcome? And I said, no, and I'll tell you why I have that position. So I have been here a long time, and I think I'm older than Lesley. Lesley was not around when I was not born when I started, I'm pretty sure. So my other disclaimer is I have two perspectives. I've been a clinician for a long time. I do clinical trials, try to look at new therapies for patients. So if I say anything that's nihilistic, I'm far from it. Oncologists are often the most optimistic people around. But I also have a perspective of other patients. So I've been doing a lot of work with CADIF, now called the Canadian Drug Agency, and there's a very strong patient voice with regard to drug approvals and thinking about what it is that patients are looking for with new therapies. So you could consider that remote models of care are kind of part of those new therapies, or maybe they're just freestanding therapies on their own. Some people think that I'm a Luddite, and I will not deny that. And if you don't remember what that is, this was a group of people from a couple centuries ago who resisted change. It was a threat to their livelihood, so they went about destroying machines and things like that. And now Luddites are just people who are either afraid of or ignore technology. I'm neither, but I have a healthy skepticism. In my talk, I'm going to mostly focus on Canadian data because I think, as I'll get to, the practice environment that we're in might be very different than the Mayo Clinic in terms of what we're willing to support or able to support within a publicly funded healthcare system. So this is just, I did a lot of internet reading over the last 10 days when I was asked to do this. So, and this is from the British Medical Journal. General practitioners are not Luddites, but they want safe, equitable care. I would say oncologists really are the same. And the important part in this, at the beginning of this editorial, is that I think that clinicians want to provide care to patients that is evidence-based. And it doesn't disadvantage patients with complex health needs. So when I was listening to Rob Hamilton, I thought, and I work with Rob Hamilton, we share patients, I thought, testis cancer is not the most complicated cancer problem that we are facing right now. And it's fortunate the outcomes are so good, and what he described, the model of care for that patient population, I would agree fits perfectly. But I can't think of anything in my patient population that would fit into the model that he described to you. So we want evidence-based care when we're making decisions. So clearly there's been wins for virtual care. Here I am in a virtual care meeting, and I won't deny that there have been some wins. So it's very efficient. There was an emphasis on patients wanting efficiency in the way their care is provided to them, the information exchange. It eliminates travel time, so it makes it more accessible. That eliminates a lot of expense. Caregivers and patients can be in their own surroundings. I do virtual visits with somebody who had CAR T-cell therapy from Vancouver, and I'm always talking to him in his lodge, which is at the bottom of Sun Peaks in the middle of British Columbia. So it's a very comfortable environment for him, and fills me with longing that I wish I was skiing. In the pandemic, everybody wanted to avoid waiting rooms. People were thinking about SARS. If you were around in 2003, as I was, the best way to get SARS was to come to a hospital. Almost all of the infections were spread that way. So people had this lingering memory of, I don't want to go to the hospital, I'll die if I go there. So we adopted virtual care really, really quickly, as you've already heard earlier today. So these are data that Dr. Berlin and colleagues generated with regard to the hematologic malignancy population at Princess Margaret Hospital, and looking at virtual care visits from just before the pandemic through the first year of that. So a lot of patients, a lot of visits, and about a third of the patients a third of the visits after March 2020, we all remember the day that the hospitals closed down, about a third of the visits were virtual. So this exercise really looked at cost savings by patients, opportunity costs, but it looked at dollars saved by the patients as well as the time that it was taking them to come and go. I won't explain the methodology, but it's pretty clear in this paper that there was advantages here. What was interesting was that whether a patient had a virtual visit or an in-person visit, because certain hematologic disciplines don't lend themselves so well to that, the patient populations were fairly similar in terms of whether or not they wanted a future virtual visit. If they were there in person, about a third wanted a virtual visit. If they had a virtual visit, about a third. So I do think, though, to the specific question of AI integrated remote models of care, that there's a lot more questions than answers. And I think my questions are all on the AI side. I can appreciate the virtual care limitations as well. But I think at the top of the list, and this is from a publication late last year, how are inequalities in access, acceptabilities to patients, and receipt of telehealth service going to be mitigated? How do we get around patients' apprehensions around these things, and in particular, the inequities that are inevitable when we're talking about rolling out technology to everybody who does not have the literacy or the finances to experience that technology? How can this be optimized to improve patient care experience? You've heard a little bit about that this morning, that patient satisfaction is generally pretty high with these, but we haven't rolled in the AI part of this, and we'll get to that in a second. What's the impact on clinical outcomes, patient-reported outcomes, healthcare utilization, costs? We all pay for healthcare in Canada, right? Like we're the funders of this ultimately, and what are the implications when we adopt technology that, looking at that big supercomputer, is not going to be cheap? So where does that come from? There's a lot of literature about clinical trials, and clinical trials is at the heart of what I've been doing academically for a long time. I'm not going to say anything about that, but certainly there's strongly held opinions about how this could either help or might even be a hindrance to clinical trials. And really, at the heart of this discussion is what does this do to the humanness part of the healthcare delivery? Like, do people go to physicians or other practitioners, I think in part to be with another person when they're having a crisis, when they're going through something difficult, and what does all this technology do to that relationship? So on the topic of equity in cancer care, how are we doing? I said there's a concern about whether or not AI-driven virtual models will make those equity disparities greater. We already know from Canadian cancer statistics, if you go to the Canadian Cancer Society website, they have very smart and important Canadian data about economics and access. So low-income Canadians are less likely to receive curative treatment even if they have early stage disease. So even in the publicly funded healthcare system with no technology strings discussed, outcomes are worse if you happen to be poor in Canada. So I think there are interventions that can remove barriers to improve access, but the evidence of what types of interventions are needed in high-income countries like ours are actually quite limited. So our colleagues in the Alberta Cancer Board did this systematic review and meta-analysis of studies that looked at interventions or programs that were going to remove barriers. So if we believe, for example, that virtual care, AI associated or not, is going to remove barriers, what can we learn from this meta-analysis? So these are high-income countries. Most of these barrier removal studies actually happened in the United States, and only about a quarter of them were from UK, Australia, and Canada. Actually, 6 of the studies out of the 76 were from Canada, and 3 described virtual health initiatives. Only one of those actually addressed increasing access to cancer care in a marginalized patient population, and that was in people of African American descent or immigrant populations. So are we doing a lot to remove barriers outside of what we've been discussing today with regard to access to cancer care? Doesn't seem to be a lot going on in Canada. Did something change during the pandemic? These are data from, and the answer was, of course, I just described to you, all of a sudden everybody's getting a virtual visit who doesn't have to come to the hospital. So interestingly, in contrast to that, just before the pandemic, this publication from Scotland in patients with the cancers you can see on this slide, a large number of patients were asked, what do you want from your consultation when you go to the hospital? Like, what are you expecting? What are the things that you need? And they say this particular sort of large survey said that patients preferred face-to-face meetings with a consultant. They valued long appointments. All the clinicians in the room will recognize that. Sometimes it's really hard to get out of the room because people don't want to stop talking. Telephone and internet-based appointments, and this is in 2016, were not considered to be desirable. That maybe that's just because everybody in Scotland's a Luddite just like me, or there was something about it that just didn't fit right. They valued continuity, so being attached, seeing another member of the team, a nurse practitioner, a resident, or a trainee was fine, but they wanted that continuity and they wanted face-to-face care. So the pandemic, of course, changed all of that, and I don't think we're going to go back to Scotland in 2016, and I'm not proposing that for a minute. So how do people feel about this now, and are there patient populations that we're not going to serve quite as well if we're all in on virtual care? So this is a survey that was conducted by the group at Princess Margaret Hospital, again, looking at patients who have breast and prostate cancer very early on during the pandemic, and asked them about their experience with virtual care. I thought you might appreciate the irony that these people who were participating in the survey were invited by email. So if you didn't have a computer and you didn't have an email address, you weren't invited. And they responded on the internet. So you had to have internet facility to do this. So not surprisingly, so there was about 50-50 breast cancer and prostate cancer patients. Not surprisingly, about 80% of the patients were white, and almost everybody had education above high school. So right off the bat, this is a very selected patient population, and the marginalization, people with developmental disabilities, et cetera, should jump out at you in terms of even what these data say. So, you know, most of the respondents were confident internet users. That might not include everybody who was over the age of 80. And most of these visits were actually telephone visits anyway. So people were happy in general, and were asked the question, would you like to continue virtual follow-up? And 70% said yes. But what was interesting is that patients that had high distress scores, and this was done with a URTC quality of life instrument, or patients that expressed less computer confidence were much less likely, these are odds ratios for whether or not they were less likely to want to have virtual care in the future. You can see patients in particular with distress weren't particularly happy about having to go back on the telephone and talk about themselves. So there are some gaps here that need to be sorted out. And I guess really an important part of this is this going to affect the doctor-patient relationship, and I would say it's unknown, even though we all were taught, at least I was, that the doctor-patient relationship is really a cornerstone, or the doctor-practitioner relationship is the cornerstone of patient care. There has to be trust, and what's going to happen to that. So in another survey that actually comes from the UK as well, the quality of medical care and the competence of the clinician were rated as the highest value by patients. There was no question about, do you trust the AI algorithm that's going to inform your care? I inserted that. The patients in this survey knowledge, clarity, willingness to discuss treatment. The emotional status of the patients really affected whether or not their perception of the information they were processing. So we as clinicians have to be able to recognize when the person in the room with us or on the screen or on the phone is too anxious, too upset to really process what we're talking about. And I see that in my patients all the time. You can tell when people stop listening to what I'm saying. I usually stop talking because I can tell that they're not paying attention anymore. So how well do AI algorithms capture that sort of distress? Because we have to manage it, and we have to pick it up in advance to be able to manage it. So I think, this has been raised, the risk of AI-directed care, the risk to the patient-physician relationship is at risk, according to those who have written about this. There's concerns about depersonalization of care, data privacy. This alteration of the traditional roles may not be to the patient's advantage. And there's a concern about whether or not these new models might substitute a different kind of paternalism. We've been moving away from paternalism. That's what shared care is all about. Now maybe the AI-directed care is going to give us more paternalism. I think I'm going to skip over this because it's making the same point. So I just want to say, though, that aids for decision-making are not new. This is a paper from colleagues of ours in Hamilton from 2003 where shared decision-making devices were used to help help inform patients about choices. This is asking women, telling women whether or not they should have adjuvant chemotherapy for node-negative breast cancer. And this is just like somebody's science project in high school. It's literally a board with a bunch of graphs on it, and the clinician sits down and talks to the patient. And as simple as this technology was, it actually was helpful. It didn't change the number of people who picked therapy or not, but it made the women who were having these conversations feel better about their decisions and feel that they had more information to go on. So doctors and nurses and clinicians have been doing this for a really long time. I just thought I should point that out since I'm the oldest person in the room. So I might only have 10 more seconds, but I want to make sure that we address this point, which are what are the outcomes that we're actually talking about. Today you heard a lot of different outcomes on everybody's app, and all of those are quite credible. If you ask clinicians, or if you ask the cancer system, what are the important outcomes, it might be that the outcomes are the ones that are on the left-hand side of the slide. And if you ask patients, you might get a different answer, and rightly so. That's been my experience in my practice. That's been my experience working with the Canada Drug Agency. The ones at the bottom there, I think I kind of imagined were going to be discussed in the context of this meeting. So there's a number of outcomes that we need to be looking at, and I guess we have to decide which are the ones that are really the most important and the ones that are the most relevant. And if we really wanted to know whether or not something was better, and I'll stop after this slide, then we need to make a comparison, right? Like we can't just go and look at what Michael Crump did over the last 33 years in the old way and then compare that to the new way. We clinicians, people who are trialists know that that's a comparison that's quite biased. So we can't take the current state of we're going to look at AI-informed virtual visit outcomes and compare them to what happened 10 years ago, because lots of things have changed. In other words, there's lots of biases. We don't know if the old group and the new group are the same, and that came up actually in the discussion about the in-hospital care Kaplan-Meier curves you saw very early this morning. In fact, the main reason for the difference between those outcomes is that the patients are not the same. So we do need a randomized trial. I've been a clinical trialist for 33 years, and it seems to me that a lot of this could be satisfied by actually comparing models of care delivery. We can't just say we've improved the model because we have better technology. We need to look at this in a scientific way, and people even in this field have called upon investigators to do this randomized trial, and you heard some examples of that earlier today. So we do need the randomized trial. AI may not recognize diversity. It may not recognize marginalized populations. It may not account for these vulnerable populations and underrepresented populations in AI algorithms. And as I said, I'm not sure that it's going to recognize distress. So can AI integrated models of care improve cancer care outcomes? I don't think we actually know. I actually think that it probably could. I heard a lot of really compelling evidence this morning to say that in various ways it's going to do that. But I don't think we can blanket accept that it's going to happen. Should we adopt these models or should we test them? And this technology is not going to be free, and we might have to give up something in order to adopt it. So where is that conversation going to happen? And how do we ensure access to all of this if it really is better? And I'll stop.
Awesome. I like the sarcasm, and I like the irony also that he went against digital tools using PowerPoint and digital pictures instead of slide projectors and Polaroids. But okay, so we'll go for the second poll to give some time for the rebuttals. So the question first is, so far, has anyone moved the needle and changed your position from the start? So there were 61 votes at the beginning, so let's get some. Wow, almost going to be 50-50. You're so influential. That's crazy. You started all so sure. It's like, yes. And now it's like, well, maybe not. Okay. Perfect. 61, the same number of people that voted before. So can we move to the next question? 64. So who made the best argument so far? And we're not defining what we mean by best, so you can interpret it any way you like. We're not prescriptive on this one. Michael Crump crashed it. Who wrote this? And can we move to the next one? Who made the funniest arguments so far? There should be a third option for me, actually, here. Just I needed that boost. It's Friday afternoon. Come on.
It's okay if you vote with your hands.
2 hands up means me, like this. Okay, this was good. So good arguments from both sides. I'm not gonna I will leave now discretion to each one if they want to summarize their own position or just rebuttal. But I think the spirit was 5 minutes rebuttal for each one, and then we'll have some Q&A. So if during the rebuttal, if you want to put Q&As on the Slido, that I'll try to go through them at the last part. So first rebuttal, Lesley goes back up.
Thank you.
And you can be funnier this time.
I can be funnier? Thanks for the permission. I just want to point out that the Luddite version of the argument took 5 minutes extra than the AI-generated version, just on a Friday afternoon. Maybe we keep that in mind for the next vote.
Just lost 15 seconds.
I only have about 10 seconds of content. It's fine. Okay, so no, let's address this. I think really some very good points were made. I think especially around could we actually end up increasing paternalism? As someone who dedicated most of my career to patient-reported outcomes, person-centered care, and patient experience, we genuinely do worry about that. So I'll give you one point on that one. I do worry about that. But I think in general, if we could all keep in mind that AI to date has been extremely polarizing. It's kind of like an all or nothing approach. Like it is going to fully replace humans and we're going to be interacting with robots. But we have to take a much more pragmatic approach to this. I think the bottom line on some of the key arguments around inequality in access, acceptability from patients, patient-provider communication, impact on clinical trials, and then the continuity of care piece, is that we need to take that pragmatic approach. So this is not a black or white perspective. We need to utilize AI to complement each of those things and to accelerate change in each of those spaces. So it doesn't need to be a replacement argument. I think that's where our brains always go is, well, we think about it from an automation perspective. This is actually if we think about it, this should enhance patient-provider communication, because if we could triage the patients that need that longer appointment time and get that to them, whereas somebody maybe with testicular cancer that would prefer that virtual appointment, we free up that highly specialized clinician time for those that need it most. So this doesn't have to be an all or nothing that I think is where traditionally many of these polarizing conversations have gone. So number one, I think we need to swing the pendulum back to a much more pragmatic approach here and not make this black or white. I'll posit that from an equality perspective, it actually would improve equity and equality in the system, because we're delivering the right amount of care to the people who need it the most, where they're able to access and consume that health care. Because if we can plan a system with far more inputs than we could actually even compute on a regular computer in today's time, if we can do that in seconds, we can increase and make sure that we're utilizing the right amount of testing to ensure that our decisions are sound with the information that we have today. All of science has been built on the information that we have today. Even when you take a look at the number of cycles of chemotherapy, think about even just a standard colorectal cancer from, FOLFOX. We used to treat how many cycles? And you did study after study to make sure that we were cutting that down to the most parsimonious model of care possible, with balancing outcomes both from a clinician, patient, and system perspective. And so I think we need to do exactly the same thing when we're approaching AI in our health system, is we need to make sure that we are targeting it for where the system needs help the most. There will be a clinician shortage. We're already in it, not there will be, we're in it. So let's utilize it to help combat that. Let's not think about it as in terms of a replacement. Acceptability from patients, I think, is key, because we have created this sort of Terminator kind of concept in people's minds. And that's where some of these privacy barriers, procurement barriers, IP barriers, all those things that are put into place to big organizations to prevent the acceleration of these innovations, we've put those in place from a fear-based perspective. And I think what we have to do is really shift the conversation around this. We have AI built into many systems already. And just helping people understand and decrease that level of fear will improve the acceptability. But again, it's the same argument, my number one argument, which is we need to swing the pendulum back. This is not sort of a polarizing yes, no, fully replace, black, white kind of argument. As soon as we embrace this, I will agree with you, Dr. Crump, in terms of the biases, or what we call black box models in AI, which is that the system is learning on itself, even though it's faster and better than we can do with our human brains alone. There is black box thinking and biases introduced in AI. So that's why we need to break open this paradigm and arm it with as much information as possible so that we can decrease the number of biases in the system, both from the patient perspective, the actual computing perspective, and then the clinicians that are helping to build what I still believe is the most important piece, is that therapeutic relationship between patients and providers, freeing them up to do the specialized work that they're trained to do. Thank you.
That was so well thought and articulated, but also so Canadian. You gave him 2 points. You said it's not an either or. It's like, you guys want to hag before continuing the rebuttal? It's good. Okay. Okay, so Dr. Crump.
See, when the soft part of Lesley came out, she went overtime. AI-driven Lesley. So, I mean, I agree. I do agree with the pragmatism of this. So there's definitely not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to all of this. Clear. I was interested in Dr. Hamilton's comment in testicular cancer, which is generally a disease of sort of men in their 25 to 30s who don't interact with the healthcare system much anyway. There was no role for physical examination, and you can get by with technology and tests at a very simple level. I work in an area where doing all of that stuff, like doing blood tests and doing imaging in people who are well, makes no difference at all. We don't detect anything. We don't detect recurrences. We detect recurrences by patient interactions. We detect it by seeing patients in our clinics. And so I think there's a little bit of the old-fashioned me that is worried about one of the implications of virtual care on learners. There was a survey of attitudes in Scotland or in England, getting feedback from patients about how they felt about telephone consultations in a colon cancer follow-up clinic. And by and large, the patients were okay with it. Something did change in the pandemic, as I said. But what was interesting was the discomfort that learners or inexperienced clinicians felt with having to manage things over the phone. Because that's just not the medical model that we're used to. We're used to being able to see people face-to-face, appreciating whether or not do they look like they're sick? Do they look like they're distressed? You know, and there's a bit of art to that, and I'm going to say this without hubris. I think you get comfortable understanding what's going on in your clinic. I tell my learners in my clinic that 90% of what I do in following patients in person in clinic is psychiatry. I can tell pretty quickly whether or not somebody who's walked in the door is, or has come to my clinic, whether or not their cancer has come back, whether or not they're sick. I've learned to figure that out. And whether or not AI can do that, or whether you can feel comfortable looking at somebody's two-dimensional face on a video screen and sorting out whether or not there's really something going on. I think we all have to learn how to do that. But there were concerns in this survey, to go back to it, that the trainees didn't want patients coming almost, they wanted the patients to come back so they could understand them a little bit better. So there is a need to not only maintain the physician-patient relationship, but to get it started. I really liked Jenny Catton's comment about, if you're building trust and respect, talk to people about what they want. And I think that was a really good point about how do you want to be communicated with. But fundamental to that is actually saying there's a relationship to start here. There has to be trust, and how do we best go about that? In one of the slides I skipped over, there's reference to trusted AI algorithms that are now guiding. It was a radiation planning slide. I thought, how do we even unpack what a trusted algorithm is? How are my patients going to trust Lesley's AI algorithm? How would we even know? So I think doctors, if we're going to be using AI-generated decision aids, we have to understand very much about what's behind that. What were the data that went into that algorithm to make this look like it's the better recommendation? So there's, I guess, a job for all of us to do. The educators have to make sure the clinicians understand what's in this AI algorithm, where did it come from. We can always pick apart a clinical trial in a journal. We know exactly what happened to the patients in a randomized trial, but I'm not going to be able to tell my patient, where did this decision come from that ChatGPT or Sherlock created for you and your cancer? I have no idea. So I'm comfortable that we have a task ahead of us in terms of making it intelligible to the learners, to the practitioners, but also to the patients if we're going to use this information correctly. And I haven't seen a lot of that effort yet, and I look forward to when it can happen. So I do think that I agree with Lesley that being pragmatic about this is really important. My follow-up practices for patients are not the same for every single patient that I treat because they're all individuals. I've learned who needs a half an hour conversation even though they're perfectly well and who can get by with 5 minutes. So we all learn that because we interact with people. And I hope, and because I don't know, whether or not this dependency on virtual care, using AI algorithms to help sort out what patients' symptoms mean, I hope we're not jeopardizing a relationship that sometimes is actually hard to put together and is actually quite valuable to patients. I'll close on this last one. I'm now quite comfortable, seeing many patients with certain diseases, very intermittently, they can send me a blood test and I can talk to them on the phone and I know that everything's okay. But almost uniformly, when people come back, they go, it's really good to see you. I feel a little bit better because I'm now here in the clinic. You're looking at me and I'm looking at you. That's not hubris. That's just how people are when they have cancer, when the journey is difficult, and there's a lot of emotion. So they have not everybody wants this, but there's a safe place in clinics as well. Not safe from viruses necessarily, but at least a place where people can come and be heard in a way that they're used to being heard. Maybe since you're all way younger than me, maybe that's a paradigm that's going to disappear, but I don't think so. I think the human part of this is going to remain, and it's up to us to make sure that it isn't sacrificed by adopting technology that doesn't pay attention to it.
Yeah, I'll clarify. I was alive in 1998, so you're not that old, so we don't have to go into that. Yeah, for the team, we said we want smart, nice-spirited, and nice people for inviting to the debate. I think the nice, we need to erase it. These are too nice because they're agreeing on everything. So next year, we'll bring nasty people to the debate. Okay, so there's very good questions there. I want to go the first one. Jenny put the name there, and then the second one, I will ask. I know it's anonymous, but if the person is comfortable, think about it while we address the first one. I want a little bit of clarification on something. So if you're comfortable, we're in a family. What happens here stays here. So, but I think it will be important to clarify. So the first question goes for you, Michael. It's that you rely heavily on the patient-MD relationship. How you reconcile what you said, that the in-person appears to be better, with the presentation this morning that appeared that an AI model was more empathetic than the doctors they compare with?
Which way's on?
He was against technology, as you know.
Hi. Oh, I think both Jenny and I chuckled at that. Are there any psychiatrists in the room? So I guess, so it doesn't surprise me in a way, because, well, I guess it does. You can tell me, can you program enough neural connections in an AI, whatever it is, to make responses sound empathic? So if you,
Yes.
I guess, yeah. So if you have enough individuals that are helping you with the training of your algorithm that just are used to talking in an empathic way, then sure. Are all doctors empathic by nature? Some more than others. Is every interaction empathic? No, because it's influenced by lots of other things. So in a way, we laughed, but I thought, yeah, that makes sense, because if you're deliberately making sure that it's like that every single time, then you're probably going to win. I try to be empathic every single time, and I can tell you that I am not. So humans are different from machines. They're fallible, and that may be why that difference stood out. I think if you put up surgeons or oncologists, you would probably get the same result.
Can I say one thing to that, Ellie?
Yeah.
I think what we saw today, though impressive, what we will see in the next 5 years is even more unbelievable. Like, we've seen voice recognition that can pick up anxiety with somebody that, just from their voice patterns, that could then triage that patient to a proper inpatient or in-person visit that otherwise may have gone undetected, because on all of their validated instruments and all of their clinic appointments, they said that they were completely fine. And a computer is not rushed, and sometimes clinicians are, and patients lie. We've seen that a million times over when, a husband and wife comes in and the husband says they were, perfectly fine on every single symptom, and then the wife is like, that's not true. You didn't sleep for the last 4 nights, and you've had so much pain, and you've been, curmudgeon, and you've been, all of that, right? And so I think we can use it we have to get out of the mindset of where we are today and where we'll be going, so that we can accelerate our models of care to match where we'll be. What's the Canadian expression from Wayne Gretzky? We have to
Where the puck is going to be.
play where the puck is going to be.
Canadian person.
And I think that's what we have to get out of. We have to get out of what we know today and think about what is going to be readily available in our palms in the next 5 to 10 years.
It's interesting, like as you were answering, the empathic is also like, it's that ability to like listen and show that you're the other, that it's being heard. So sometimes we understand it's like, oh, nodding or active listening, but in certain ways, computers can be super empathic, because if they're actually listening to your question and they respond on spot, that's an empathetic response. It's not like warm and fuzzy that some people like make it analogous to empathic, but we all get like these emotional wow when we put something on ChatGPT and gives us exactly what we're expecting. There's like, oh my God, how did it knew about it? Because you're not expecting it from a computer, but you kind of expect it from a human. But I guess that's our generation, not yours. No, I'm kidding.
He knew that secretly I was going to divulge. I have never gone to ChatGPT, but I think I will tonight.
No, but I mean, my kids are not going to be surprised by that the same way I'm surprised. So it's the empathy is gonna shift, I guess. So the second question I want is the person oh, awesome, thank you. What's your name? Sorry. Christopher. That's a great question. Says, how does remote care that requires vast personal information from patient still safeguards patient privacy and ensure patients have a right to control what is and isn't disclosed? So the question I had to you is like, what do you mean vast personal information, and how is that different from an in-person visit, like of any type of visit? So you're saying, okay, there's a lot of information, but always there's a lot of information. Is this more information? What are you referring there?
I think this gets it if you're looking at this paradigm in which we're leapfrogging in our capabilities, and we start pulling in blood tests and images and making inferences about the data beyond what a patient can say to a clinician face-to-face. So if you have data, for example, that together suggests most people with this profile are probably in the beginning stages of pregnancy, then they flag this patient as probably pregnant, even if the patient doesn't know or wouldn't have disclosed that to the physician.
Gotcha.
How do you protect in that sensitive situation when that information is now out of the patient's?
Awesome. The famous Target example of the pregnancy. Okay. No, there's a case on Target, and the person was an adolescent and got pregnant. It's a whole case study. But do you want to answer that? How you ensure that you're going to be kind of protecting that? And
I think security of information and protecting the information is only as good as the technology that we have today. And I don't mean to keep making that argument of thinking where we're going to be. But back to Ali's point around, where the kids right now are in a completely different mindset than we are probably all in this room for their willingness to share their personal information. So I think we just have to be careful. I'm not going to give a great answer, but I think we just have to be careful not to add paternalism to those decisions as well. I think to date, we've done that. We've tried to make things highly controlled to the point that it has stifled innovation in many domains. And so I think there needs to be an element of choice. We need a pragmatic approach, and we need to understand people's needs, wants, and preferences, not from our own biases, but be able to tailor that to the future possibilities that we'll have in the data space. I don't even want to touch security, privacy, all of that stuff, because it's even at a point now that can be so safe and safeguarded that I think we have to stop worrying about that. It's more the personal choice, I think, from your perspective, that we need to figure out.
I mean, from the simple clinician perspective, I agree that maybe this should be, you can opt in or you opt out about what's going to happen with your data. I mean, even Epic now has you have the capability of, some stuff is what's it called, lockboxed, some is not. So I think there are tools to make sure that patients, what they want to keep from whoever is respected. I think we need to educate people that that's their choice. So maybe this isn't. Not everybody's all in.
okay, so last question. Like, the second one is more of a comment. It's saying basically, if a machine performs better than the human, why you want the second best, just by romantic reasons, and maybe it needs to change and just the humans convey the information or how we train humans. But I think it relates to the first one to some extent. saying with AI-generated activities like notes or intervention, they're trained based on human, basically, notes or that intervention, and they may have embedded errors in it. And then if you deploy these at scale, you might be perpetuating errors that you basically baked in your new method. So how would you know what the source of truth is in that reality, and how you make sure that you don't lose that capability of validating a new model or a new way of doing things in that setting?
I don't think that's any different than the current model that we have from inputs. It just takes way longer in today's paradigm in terms of the length of time it takes to fail on clinical trial, or from going from in vitro to animal to human models. And we could have perpetuated errors along the way. We've brought medications to market that we had no idea the hidden pitfalls and bear traps that were there, and that's just from a medication perspective. So I don't think that's any different than a non-AI solution. I think what AI brings is an ability to fail faster. And if we can fail faster, we can course correct faster, and we can get to the optimized solution with the information that we have today. I think that argument holds true whether we're talking about AI or not AI. I just think AI will enable us to get to the correct answer faster.
But there's a bias of measurement there, because like you're saying, okay, you're failing, meaning you're quantifying the failure, but in the current reality, you're failing, but you're not quantifying it. It's kind of the status quo is better. How do you know? No, because we compare this other method and this fails a lot, but you're not actually, you can't know what you don't know and you don't measure. So it's a
Are you arguing for me, for my side?
a little bit.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
I think so. I'm biased. No. Okay, I got censored as moderator. I knew it was going to happen eventually. Okay, I think we're all coming close to time. So let's do the final vote, and then we'll move to the closing remarks. This was great. I need to thank also Dr. Crump, because we had a change on the debaters. Someone had a family issue and everything is fine, so everything went well, but he accepted graciously to come on board, and so thank you also for that. That should not steer your voting, by the way. Don't be nice back. Thank you, team, for putting this up. This is great. I can always make more bad jokes. Dad jokes also are my specialty. Okay, we can skip this one now. Who was the 4% who wants another moderator next year? It's like, is you Christopher? Okay. So you have to declare a winner now. AI-integrated remote models of care will improve cancer care outcomes. Do you agree or disagree with this position? Just remind you all that in the second poll, 64% said that it actually steered, you were rethinking your original vote. So either you were being pseudonized or you were bluntly lying. Okay. So in the initial vote, we had 61 voters, a little bit less, so you got people more engaged over the course of the debate. Usually it's the other way around, so that's good.
I voted 3 times.
Yeah. All your cell phones is like. So there was 87% yes and 13% no, and now 81% yes and 19% no. I don't know if that's part of the accepted variance of the voting, but in traditional terms, I would say then Dr. Crump moved the needle. A 7%, so don't get too excited, but you won the debate. So again, I want to thank you both for nice debate, lots of food for thoughts, extremely articulated arguments. So it was very good. And before passing the remarks, thank everyone for staying and participating on the symposium. I hope you had fun and learned and you get the spirit of the stuff we're trying to do a little bit unconventionally. So thanks so much. Oh.